Okay, good evening everybody. I've decided to make a quick video on something that I discovered, and it's to do with population reads. I've got a software called Pokerstars 4 that I believe everyone should have. If not Pokerstars, then Hold'em Manager 2 or 3 or whatever it is, the equivalent basically, because it allows you to analyze how the population plays, and you can discover some pretty serious leaks. I did this once before on 888, but here I want to focus on the most recent game that I've been playing, which is 5NL Zoom on Pokerstars. Okay, so I analysed a lot of things, but this is where I started. I analysed everybody in the pool, and I've had 35,000 hands experience in the pool. It's not that many compared to hundreds of thousands, but it's a pretty good starting point. My 3-bet pre-flop is 12.5%. So if someone opens, there's a 12.5% chance, or 1 in 8, that I will 3-bet you. Right? Obviously depending on positions, but overall it's about that percentage. But the average player in the pool, they 3-bet only 7% of the time, right? That's almost half as often as I 3-bet. Now, I'm not exactly loose by any stretch of the imagination. I 3-bet fairly standardly before discovering the statistic. And it's shocking. It can lead to some really interesting conclusions that you definitely should be implementing into your own game. First conclusion is that the average 3-bet range is significantly stronger than it should be. Not just somewhat stronger, but significantly. Imagine having a pretty normal 3-bet range and then half it. That is pretty much what this is, right? Because 7 is almost half of 12.5. It's significantly stronger. If you lose all the 3-bet bluffs and some of the weaker 3-bet value hands, you're left with an insanely strong range. This is something to back it up. I looked this up because I just had to see if it affected my game at all. This graph here is what happens when I call a 3-bet. So I've raised, I've been 3-bet, and I call. Obviously, this is really bad. I'm losing quite a lot. I'm losing at 320 big blinds per 100. I know 239 hands is a very small sample, but this is ridiculously losing. Like, this is huge. The only reason why it's not a larger loss than this is because at the end here I discovered that stat and decided to call a lot tighter. So it was originally at minus 350 BB per 100, or 370 BB per 100, which is really bad. To put that into perspective, I open for 3.5x when I open, right? So if I open, then get 3-bet, and then fold, I automatically lose 350 big blinds per 100. Before, I was losing at 370 big blinds per 100. So I would theoretically be better off folding everything rather than calling in that instance. Now that it's gotten a bit better, I can see some hands which are profitable, right, calling the 3-bet because it's under the minus 350 BB per 100. But like overall, I should tighten up way. Like I should overfold to 3-bets so often. So I should. Additionally, I should 4-bet nutted range, right? If a 3-bet range is really tight and strong, then there's no point trying to 4-bet bluff it. 4-bet bluffing is kinda meh. I did double check. I checked how often my 4-bet got through by way of the 4-bet preflop success stat, and it's kind of not that special. It's like 40%, 45%, which is basically slightly losing. If you had any two cards and decided to 4-bet versus the 3-bet range, you just lose. So you do have to 4-bet a slightly nutted range. Slightly? No, you have to 4-bet a nutted range. Something like queens plus ace king definitely beats the 3-bet range. You could even squeeze in jacks and tens, an ace queen suited, an ace queen offsuit maybe, depending on if it's button v blinds, that kind of stuff. But the adaptations I should make is basically laid out here. I should definitely not be 4-bet bluffing. Okay, I want to talk about something else now. There's a second read that I've got on the population, which I'm pretty excited to share. So let's set the filter to only include hands where I 3-bet pre-flop. So I'm not calling 3-bets, but I 3-bet myself. Very nice looking graph, right? It's a pretty smooth upward trend with an absolutely crushing win rate, almost 200 big blinds per 100. But what caught my eye the most here was my post-flop statistics for when I c-bet. To put a bit of context into my 3-bet plan, I always c-bet flop for a third pot, no matter what position, no matter what the board is, because if ever I 3-bet, I always have a range advantage, right? Because if they call, they didn't 4-bet, and my 3-bet range is fairly tight, or used to be anyway before this. It used to be fairly tight. So I'd always have the range advantage. It doesn't matter what the board is. I ran several boards through Pio versus some ranges, and there was only like 2% of flops where I didn't have a range advantage, where it was like break even, where like both me and Villain had 50% of the pot each. But in every other case, I always had a significant advantage. I always had more of the pot than they did. So it makes sense to always c-bet flop 1/3 pot. You don't lose any EV by doing it, you just print. If I c-bet the turn, it would usually be for 55% or something like 60%. It depends on stack sizes, right? If they're a bit deeper, I'd go to 67% to jam river comfortably. If they're a fish, I'd obviously bet a little bit larger, but usually it's 55%, right? The thing about these sizes is that if you always c-bet flop for a third pot, if you do that with any 2 cards, Villain has to fold 25% for you to break even. And this stat here tells me that Villains typically fold around 25% of the time, right? So if you 3-bet and then you c-bet the flop for a third pot, you wouldn't really be making any money. However, if you c-bet turn for 55% pot, if you run the maths, your bet has to work approximately 35% of the time. So Villain has to fold 35% of the time. However, they're folding 47.66% of the time. That is a huge difference. They're giving up 10% more than they should. In other words, turn c-bets in 3-bet pots are printing. They are so profitable. If you just 3-bet, c-bet the flop for a third pot, and then c-bet the turn for 55%, you would win with any 2 cards. And it's not even like a small advantage. It would be a small advantage if it was like the c-bet to turn success was like 36%, 37%, but this is 47.66. It's absolutely astronomically significant. So to take advantage of this, I'm going to try a new exploit line. When in position to an open, I'm going to 3-bet anything remotely playable, like 9-7 suited, 9-6 suited, 5-3 suited, King 10 off, King Jack off, Queen Jack off, anything. And then if they call, I will c-bet the flop 1/3 pot, then I'll barrel every turn. And we'll see how that does. I'm excited to use this. So here's the exploit line. Here are some other advantageous factors for this line to take note. Opponents do not 4-bet anywhere near enough than they should, right? I'm also guilty of this by only 4-betting queens plus ace king, but that is a reflection on the population not 3-betting enough. Other players also 4-bet a really tight range. Some players only 4-bet kings plus, because I've seen queens and ace king be flattered before. So, but I've also seen ace king be 4-bet. So it's kind of a mix. It depends on your opponent. But overall, opponents do not 4-bet anywhere near enough, which means if they open and you 3-bet an extremely loose range, the counter exploit is to 4-bet me loads. But opponents do not do that. The other thing is, if I c-bet the flop 100% for a third pot, and I plan to barrel every turn, villain could ruin my plans by check raising flop. However, that really doesn't happen, like anywhere near enough of the time to discount this line being a strong line. The fact that my opponents do not 4-bet and they don't check raise flop enough means that this exploit line will be very, very consistent. Like, if I 3-bet, we're almost always going to reach a flop when they call, or they'll just follow pre-flop, which is fine as well. And if they call if they call pre-flop, then they'll 75% of the time call the flop, and then I'll always get the turn barrel in. Like, it's really hard for me to not reach the turn after 3-betting the flop, pre-flop. So, I'm excited. I'm not going to lie, I'm really excited to try this strategy. I'll basically be playing my normal game, but throwing this in, and hopefully I'll see my win rate rise a couple of big points per 100. Which is all we want, really, isn't it? Thanks for watching. If you've got any thoughts, any questions, don't hesitate, leave a comment below. I will try and answer. If there's anything I glossed over, any technical things that I glossed over, feel free to ask. I'll try and answer as best as I can, maybe even make another video on it. Alright guys, peace.